The great hall of the Galactic Council stretched high into the darkness above. Thousands of seats filled the curved walls, each designed for different alien bodies. Some seats held creatures made of living crystal that sparkled like diamonds. Others supported beings with many arms that moved like ocean waves. Flying creatures with bright feathers perched on special platforms near the ceiling. Ambassador Wei stood at the center podium, a small human figure surrounded by giants. His black hair was touched with gray, and his simple blue uniform looked plain next to the colorful displays of other species. The crystal beings wore no clothes but glowed with inner light. The tentacles draped themselves in flowing silk that changed colors. The bird-like strutted in armor made from their own molten feathers. "Members of the council," said, his voice carrying clearly through the translation devices. "I stand before you today to announce that humanity will be leaving the Galactic Council." A wave of sounds filled the hall. The crystals chimed like bells. The made wet whistling noises. The clicked their beaks rapidly. Most of the sounds meant surprise, but could tell that many also meant relief. High Counselor, a crystal being who looked like a living mountain of purple gems, spoke first. "Ambassador, this decision seems sudden. Has something happened to upset your people?" Smiled sadly. "Nothing has upset us, Counselor. We have simply realized that our ideas about how the galaxy should grow and develop are very different from yours. We believe in helping others reach their full potential. You believe in expanding territory and gathering resources. These ideas cannot work together." Trade Minister raised 3 of his 8 arms. His gray skin was covered in patterns that shifted like oil on water. "The humans have always been different in their thinking. Perhaps this is for the best. They ask too many questions about our business methods." Several delegates ruffled their feathers in agreement. General As, whose red and gold feathers marked her as a high warrior, spoke with pride in her voice. "The humans have no natural weapons. No thick skin, no poison, no ability to read minds. They are weak creatures who hide behind their tools and their endless talking about right and wrong." Listen to the comments without anger. He had expected this reaction. For over 100 years, humans had been part of the council, but most alien species saw them as boring and weak. Humans could not change their shape like they could not grow new bodies like the crystal beings. They could not fly or breathe poison gas or see through solid rock. "We understand your feelings," said quietly. "We know that many of you have always wondered why humans were given a seat on this council. We are not the strongest or the most advanced. We are just human." High Counselor made a sound like wind chimes. "Humans have contributed to our discussions, of course. Your technical advice has been noted and sometimes useful. Your cultural programs have been interesting. But perhaps the galaxy will run more smoothly without your constant concerns about ethics and potential consequences." Nodded. "Perhaps it will. We hope you are right." The formal withdrawal took 3 hours. Lawyers from 12 different species read documents in languages that sounded like music, grinding stone, or digital static. Signed papers with a simple pen while others used claws, tentacles, or beams of light to mark their agreement. When the ceremony ended, gathered the small human delegation. There were only 15 humans in the entire council complex. Earth had never sent large numbers of people to the capital. Most species brought hundreds or thousands of representatives. Humans brought just enough people to do their jobs. Dr. Sarah Martinez, the human science advisor, packed her research notes into plain boxes. "Are you sure about this? Once we leave, they won't want us back." Watched through the window as alien ships moved through space like beautiful sea creatures. "We've done what we could, Sarah. The rest is up to them." Commander Jake Roberts, the human military liaison, sealed the last of their equipment. "The generals are already planning new expansion campaigns. They think we were holding them back with our peace talks." "Maybe we were," said. "Maybe that was the point." The human living quarters were modest compared to other species. They lived in chambers that grew crystal formations like gardens. They had pools of special water and living walls that changed shape. They built nests from metal and fire. Humans just had simple rooms with beds and desks and photos of Earth. Packed his few belongings slowly. On his desk sat a small quantum communicator, no bigger than a book. It looked like a plain black box with a single red button. He picked it up and walked to the main alien communication center. Minister was working at a complex control panel, his many arms moving in careful patterns. "Ah, Ambassador, come to say goodbye to our communication systems." "Something like that," said. He placed the black box on a nearby table. "This is for emergencies only. If you ever need to contact humanity urgently, press the red button. It will reach us wherever we are." Glanced at the simple device with amusement. How thoughtful, though I cannot imagine what emergency would require human assistance. Looked at the minister for a long moment. "I hope you never find out." The human ships were small and quiet compared to the massive vessels of other species. They moved through space without fanfare or ceremony. Within days, every human had left council space. No parades marked their departure. No speeches honored their service. They simply faded away like a half-remembered dream. In the weeks that followed, life in the galaxy continued as normal. The crystal beings pursued their mysterious research into the nature of reality. They expanded their trade networks to new worlds. They planned glorious military campaigns against their ancient enemies. Nobody missed the humans. Nobody wondered where they had gone or what they were doing in the dark spaces between the stars. The galaxy was vast and full of wonders. The departure of one small, unremarkable species meant nothing. Or so everyone thought. 3 months passed since the humans left. The galaxy continued its ancient dance of trade and politics. Crystal cities grew on worlds like living sculptures. Bioships swam through space carrying precious cargo. Battle fleets practiced war games among distant stars. Then small things began to go wrong. On the trade world of Nexus Prime, Merchant Captain Ara noticed her cargo calculations were off. She stood in her ship's control room, her tentacles moving quickly over the bioorganic controls. The living computer that managed her trade routes was making mistakes. Small ones, but mistakes nonetheless. "Computer, run the cargo profit analysis again," she commanded in her whistling language. The fleshy walls of the computer core pulsed with thinking light. Numbers appeared in the air as holograms, but something was wrong. The projected profits were too high by 3%. Yesterday, they had been too low by 2%. Ara's skin changed from blue to worried yellow. For 15 years, this computer had never made calculation errors. She had bought it from the best bioengineers in the galaxy. The living brain tissue was grown from the mathematicians who had ever lived. "Run full diagnostic," she ordered. The computer checked itself thoroughly. All biological systems showed perfect health. All memory banks were clean and undamaged. Yet the calculations kept showing small errors that made no sense. Ara called her friend, Captain, who commanded another trade ship. "Are you having any problems with your navigation computer?" His purple face appeared on the communication screen. "Funny you should ask. Yesterday, my ship told me the best route to station would take 6 days. Today, for the same cargo, it says 8 days. Nothing has changed, but the computer insists the longer route is more efficient." Similar problems appeared across space. Trade computers that had worked perfectly for decades suddenly developed strange quirks. They would suggest routes that took longer than necessary. They would calculate profits incorrectly. They would recommend cargo that made no economic sense. The problems were not serious enough to stop business, but they were annoying and mysterious. Meanwhile, in the crystal cities of space, even stranger things were happening. High Mathematician Lan lived in a tower made of living diamond. The crystal structure grew upward like a tree, adding new rooms as needed. Inside the tower, mathematical equations floated in the air as patterns of colored light. For 300 years, Lan had been working on the grand calculation, a mathematical model that predicted the economic future of the entire galaxy. The crystal computer network that helped her think was made from the minds of 1,000 brilliant who had merged their consciousness into pure mathematics. But today, the calculations were producing impossible results. The trade flow between sectors 7 and 12 shows negative efficiency, she spoke to her crystal assistants. This is mathematically impossible. Trade cannot create negative value while both parties profit. Her assistants, beings of pure crystal that rang like bells when they moved, examined the calculations. The base equations are correct, high mathematician. The input data is accurate, yet the results contradict basic economic laws. Lan studied the problem for hours. She had the crystal network run the calculations 1,000 times. Every time, they got the same impossible answer. The mathematical model that had perfectly predicted galactic economics for centuries was now producing results that logic. She decided to check other crystal cities. The response was disturbing. Mathematicians across space reported similar problems. Economic models were failing. Prediction algorithms were giving contradictory results. The crystal network that connected all thinkers was experiencing something that had never happened before: mathematical uncertainty. They had their own problems with military navigation systems. General Oz stood on the bridge of her war cruiser, watching star charts flicker with incorrect information. Her bright red feathers were raised in frustration as she studied the tactical display. Navigation officer, explain why our patrol route shows 3 different distances to the same target, she demanded. Flight officer, a young with green and brown feathers, checked his instruments nervously. General, the computer shows that base station Alpha is simultaneously 50,000 kilometers away, 67,000 kilometers away, and 91,000 kilometers away. This is clearly impossible. Run a full system diagnostic, Oz ordered. The diagnostic showed that all systems were functioning perfectly. The navigation computer was healthy. The sensors were accurate. The star charts were up to date, yet the distance calculations kept changing every few minutes. Similar reports came from other military units. Navigation systems that had guided their fleets for generations were becoming unreliable. Battle computers that calculated optimal attack strategies were suggesting tactics that made no military sense. At first, military engineers assumed the problems were caused by normal equipment wear. But when they replaced the faulty systems with brand new equipment, the same errors appeared within days. Council engineer received reports about the failures from across the galaxy. As the head of the council's technical department, it was his job to investigate system problems. He sat in his office aboard the council station, his 8 arms moving across multiple control panels as he gathered data. The pattern that emerged was troubling. The failures were small but widespread. They affected dozens of different species using completely different technologies. Biocomputers, crystal networks, and mechanical systems were all developing the same types of problems. Decided to investigate further. He accessed the maintenance records for all the affected systems. What he found made his skin turn a worried shade of pale green. Every single failing system had one thing in common. During the past 5 years, they had all been visited or consulted upon by human technical advisors. The humans had always claimed they were just learning about alien technology. They said they wanted to understand how different species solved technical problems. They offered small suggestions for optimization and efficiency improvements. Most species had ignored these suggestions or implemented them without much thought. Now began to wonder what those humans had really been doing during their visits. He pulled up records of human activities over the past century. The data was extensive. Human technical teams had visited thousands of installations across the galaxy. They had studied trade computers, navigation systems, manufacturing plants, communication networks, and defense installations. Always they had been polite and curious. They asked detailed questions about how things worked. They took careful notes. They thanked their hosts and quietly disappeared. Realized with growing alarm that the humans had somehow been involved in almost every major technical system in Council space. The quiet, unremarkable humans had somehow managed to touch nearly every important piece of technology in the galaxy. And now, 3 months after they left, all of those systems were starting to fail. 6 months after humanity's departure, what had started as small technical problems became a galaxy-wide crisis. The first major conflict erupted in the border regions between the H hegemony and the free colonies of Andros. Both sides had claimed the same 3 star systems for over 200 years, but somehow they had managed to avoid serious fighting. Minor disputes were settled through negotiation. Trade continued peacefully between their worlds. But that changed on a Tuesday morning, when H Admiral decided to expand his patrol routes into the disputed zone. "These systems have belonged to the H for generations," announced to his fleet commanders. His scales glowed with aggressive purple light as he spoke. "The free colonies are weak traders who hide behind diplomacy. It is time to claim what is rightfully ours." Admiral expected the usual response: angry messages, diplomatic protests, and eventually another round of peace talks that would restore the previous balance. Instead, the free colonies immediately mobilized their entire defense fleet. "The H have invaded our territory," declared Colonel Sarah Bate, the human-trained military commander of the free colonies fleet. "We will not negotiate with aggressors." Within hours, both fleets were firing on each other. The conflict that should have been resolved with talks and compromise became a shooting war that spread to 6 different star systems. Council mediator watched the battle reports with growing alarm. The elderly diplomat had resolved conflicts for 3 centuries. Her long experience told her that something was very wrong with this situation. "Why are they fighting?" she asked her aide, a young crystal being named. "The H and the colonies have had border disputes for 200 years. They always find ways to avoid actual warfare." His crystal body flickered with confused light patterns. The historical records show 97 separate disputes between these 2 groups. In every previous case, violence was avoided through third-party mediation. Studied the records more carefully. A pattern emerged that made her feel cold despite her warm office. Who mediated those 97 previous disputes? The young crystal being checked the diplomatic archives. The mediations were handled by, they were handled by human diplomatic. Felt a sinking feeling in her stomach equivalent organ. She opened a broader search of galactic conflicts over the past century. The results were disturbing. Humans had been involved in preventing or resolving hundreds of potential wars, not as official mediators, but as helpful observers who suggested compromise solutions that somehow satisfied everyone involved. The sect of Eternal Fire and the Void had been on the verge of a religious war for 50 years. Human Cultural had organized interfaith dialogue sessions that reduced tensions. The war that should have consumed 12 star systems never happened. The mining rights dispute between the Crystal Consortium and the Metal Workers Guild had threatened to destroy the galactic economy. Human trade advisors had suggested a resource-sharing agreement that made both sides richer than fighting ever could. Dozens of other conflicts had been quietly prevented by humans who claimed they were just facilitating communication or studying diplomatic methods. Now, without human interference, old hatreds were flaring into open warfare across the galaxy. The economic problems were getting worse too. The Galactic Trade Network, which managed commerce between thousands of worlds, was failing in ways that explanation. Chief Trade Administrator stood in the network control center, watching displays that showed economic chaos spreading like a plague. The tentacles moved frantically across bioorganic controls as she tried to understand what was happening. "Food shipments to station are 3 weeks overdue," reported her assistant. "The cargo ships are following routes that make no economic sense. Instead of direct delivery, they're taking detours through 6 different systems." Checked the shipping algorithms herself. The computer programs that managed galactic trade had been optimized over centuries to find the most efficient routes. But now they were suggesting paths that wasted fuel, time, and money. "What about the grain supplies to the inner worlds?" she asked. "Delayed. The computers are routing the grain through industrial sectors instead of direct paths to consumer markets. Some of the food will spoil before it reaches its destination." Access the historical trade data. For the past 80 years, the trade network had operated with near-perfect efficiency. Ships delivered goods on time. Food reached hungry populations. Raw materials arrived at factories exactly when needed. But as she studied the records more carefully, she discovered something that chilled her. The efficiency improvements had not come from better algorithms or smarter computers. They had come from a series of small suggestions made by human economic advisors. Over the decades, humans had recommended tiny changes to trade routes. They had suggested minor modifications to shipping schedules. They had proposed small adjustments to cargo distribution patterns. Each change by itself seemed insignificant. Together, they had created a perfect economic machine. Now, without constant human tweaking, the machine was breaking down. Food shortages appeared on worlds that had been well fed for generations. Industrial planets ran out of raw materials. Consumer goods sat in warehouses while stores ran empty. The galactic economy, which had seemed so stable and efficient, was revealed to be dependent on a network of human-designed optimizations. The crisis reached the council chambers when reports arrived of civilian casualties from the spreading conflicts. The HFY War had triggered 3 other border disputes. Old enemies who had maintained peaceful coexistence for decades suddenly found reasons to fight. High Counselor called an emergency session. Representatives from dozens of species gathered in the Great Hall, but instead of their usual calm discussions, the chamber buzzed with angry voices and fearful whispers. "The trade routes are collapsing," announced Representative. "My people are running short of food on 12 different worlds. The supply ships are lost in maze-like shipping patterns that make no sense." General Oss of the military stood with her feathers raised in alarm. 3 separate wars have begun in the past month. Our peacekeeping forces are overwhelmed. The conflicts are spreading faster than we can respond to them. Mathematician Land's crystal body flickered with distressed light. "Our economic prediction models have completely failed. We cannot calculate the cost of the current crisis because our mathematical frameworks no longer function properly." High Counselor tried to maintain order, but even his usually calm crystal voice showed stress. "What is causing these simultaneous failures? How can so many different systems break down at the same time?" Council Engineer stood slowly, his skin showing patterns of deep worry. "Honorable Counselors, I have been investigating the technical failures for 3 months. I have discovered something that I believe explains our current crisis." The chamber fell silent as hundreds of alien eyes, sensors, and crystalline perception organs focused on the engineer. Every failing system, every collapsed negotiation, every broken trade route has one thing in common, continued. They were all touched, modified, or optimized by human technical advisors during the past century. The silence in the chamber became absolute. The implications of his words spread through the assembled delegates like ripples through water. "Are you suggesting," High Counselor said slowly, that the humans were somehow responsible for maintaining our entire galactic civilization. Skin turned a pale, frightened green. I am suggesting that we may have made a terrible mistake when we let them leave. Council Intelligence Director had lived for 400 years and thought she had seen everything the galaxy could offer. The tall, crystalline being had investigated corruption scandals, prevented assassinations, and uncovered hidden threats to galactic peace. But nothing in her long career had prepared her for what she discovered when she began investigating the humans. Begin with the economic records, she ordered her team of intelligence analysts. The investigation chamber hummed with activity as beings from a dozen species worked at specialized computer terminals. Crystal beings connected directly to data networks. Analysts used biocomputers that grew new neural pathways to process information. Mechanical species plugged themselves into the station's main computers. The initial findings were troubling enough. Human economic advisors had been involved in preventing 17 separate galactic economic collapses over the past century. Each time, they had identified the problem months or years before it became critical and had suggested small changes that prevented disaster. Look at the rare metal crisis of 2387, said analyst, a crab-like being with complex mathematical organs in his shell. The galactic supply of quantum processing crystals was about to run out. Computer systems across the galaxy would have failed within 2 years. But human geologist Dr. James Harrison suggested a new mining technique that increased crystal production by 300%. Studied the data with growing amazement. How did the humans know the crisis was coming? Our best economists did not predict the shortage until it was almost too late. The records show that humans had been monitoring crystal consumption rates across the galaxy for 15 years, replied. They were tracking usage patterns that no one else was watching. The investigation revealed more examples of human foresight. Food production crises that never happened because human agricultural advisors suggested crop rotation changes. Energy shortages prevented by human engineers who recommended efficiency improvements years before they became necessary. Resource conflicts avoided because human surveyors discovered alternative supply sources just in time. But the economic interventions were only the beginning. Director called intelligence analyst Ra, a flying creature with sensitive electromagnetic perception organs. You need to see what we found in the diplomatic archives. Flew to Ra's workstation. The displays showed a complex web of connections between human cultural and dozens of potentially violent conflicts. The humans were not just preventing wars, Ra explained. They were identifying the root causes of conflicts decades before they became violent. Look at this pattern. The display showed the sect of Eternal Fire and the Void, two religious groups whose beliefs were completely opposite. For 200 years, tension had been building between them. Their differences seemed impossible to resolve. The theological dispute should have led to galactic religious war, Ra continued. Both groups had billions of followers across hundreds of worlds, but look what happened. The data showed a series of small events organized by human cultural. Academic conferences where scholars from both religions discussed philosophy. Art exhibitions that showed common themes in both belief systems. Student exchange programs that let young believers learn about other perspectives. None of these events seemed important at the time, Ra said, but together they created personal relationships between the religious leaders. When the final theological crisis came, the leaders knew each other personally. Instead of declaring holy war, they agreed to disagree peacefully. Similar patterns appeared throughout the diplomatic records. Humans had been weaving webs of personal connections between potential enemies. They organized cultural exchange programs, scientific collaborations, and trade partnerships that created bonds stronger than political differences. The investigation team worked for weeks, uncovering layer after layer of human involvement in galactic affairs. The scope of their activities was staggering. "Director, we have found something unprecedented," announced Senior Analyst Eth, an ancient being whose body was made of living metal. "The humans appear to have been monitoring and preventing civilization-ending threats that we never even knew existed." Felt a chill run through her crystalline body. What kind of threats? Eth activated a holographic display that showed the galaxy in 3 dimensions. Red markers appeared throughout Council space, each one representing a potential disaster. "Climate disasters," Eth began. 17 worlds were heading toward atmospheric collapse due to industrial pollution. Human environmental scientists suggested changes that prevented ecological catastrophe. The affected worlds never knew how close they came to becoming uninhabitable. More markers appeared on the display. Plague vectors. Human medical researchers identified 12 different disease outbreaks that could have spread across species barriers. They suggested quarantine procedures and vaccination programs that stopped the diseases before they became pandemic. Stared at the display in growing horror. Continue. Asteroid impacts. Human astronomers tracked 347 asteroid trajectories that threatened populated worlds. They recommended changes to shipping routes and mining operations that caused gravitational shifts, deflecting the asteroids without anyone realizing the danger. The display showed dozens of other categories of threats. Solar flares that could have destroyed communication networks, prevented by human-suggested changes to satellite positioning. Volcanic eruptions that could have caused climate change, prevented by human-recommended geological surveys that led to pressure release operations. Resource depletion scenarios, Eth continued. The humans identified 73 different situations where critical resources would run out, causing collapse. They suggested alternative technologies, new mining locations, and conservation programs that prevented each crisis. Realized she was seeing something unprecedented in galactic history. How did they know about all these threats? How did they have the knowledge and resources to address so many problems across so many different species? "That is the most disturbing discovery of all," Eth replied. "The humans appear to have been running comprehensive threat assessment programs for the entire galaxy. They were monitoring everything: economic trends, climate patterns, disease vectors, resource consumption, social tensions, astronomical phenomena, and tracking how all these factors could interact to create civilization-ending scenarios." Senior Analyst Era, a gaseous being whose thoughts manifested as colored clouds, added her findings. "The humans built the most comprehensive database of galactic vulnerability that has ever existed. They identified every possible way our civilization could collapse and worked systematically to prevent each threat. Studied the data with growing respect and fear. How many threats were they monitoring simultaneously? Current estimate is over 10,000 active threat scenarios," Era replied, "each one capable of destroying galactic civilization if left unchecked. The humans were tracking all of them and intervening whenever the risk levels became dangerous." The investigation revealed the true scope of human competence. While other species focused on their own advancement, the pursued mathematical perfection, the expanded their trade networks, the sought military glory, humans had been quietly working to preserve everyone else's ability to pursue their goals. They had studied every species, learned every technology, understood every culture, and then used that knowledge to identify and prevent the countless ways that galactic civilization could destroy itself. "Director," said Analyst quietly, "we have identified the source of our current crisis. The humans were not just helping to maintain galactic stability. They were the primary system that prevented collapse. With them gone, all the threats they were monitoring and controlling are beginning to manifest simultaneously." Looked at the holographic display showing thousands of red threat markers spreading across the galaxy. For the first time in her 400-year life, she felt truly afraid. "How long do we have before total systemic collapse?" she asked. Eth's metal body flickered with distressed patterns. "At current rates of deterioration, approximately 6 months before galactic civilization becomes unsustainable." Realized that the Council had made the worst mistake in galactic history. They had not just lost their most valuable members. They had lost the guardians who kept everyone else alive. The emergency council session was unlike anything in galactic history. Representatives from every major species crowded into the Great Hall, their voices creating a cacophony of fear and desperate planning. Wars raged across 12 sectors. Food shortages affected 30 billion beings. Economic systems that had operated smoothly for centuries were collapsing faster each day. High Counselor stood at the center podium, his usually brilliant crystal body dim with stress. Around him, the greatest leaders of galactic civilization struggled with a problem none of them knew how to solve. "We have reviewed Intelligence Director's report," announced. "The evidence is overwhelming. Humanity was not merely a member species of our council. They were the foundation that held our entire civilization together." A wave of uncomfortable sounds swept through the chamber. Pride was a powerful force among the galactic species. For centuries, they had believed themselves to be the masters of the galaxy. The crystal beings thought their mathematical perfection made them superior. They believed their trade networks demonstrated their intelligence. They were convinced their military strength proved their worthiness to rule. Learning that the unremarkable humans had been keeping them all alive was a humbling shock that many delegates still refused to accept. "Perhaps we can rebuild these systems ourselves," suggested General Oss, her red and gold feathers raised in defiance. "The military has the finest strategic minds in the galaxy. We can learn to predict and prevent these threats." Intelligence Director activated the holographic display that showed thousands of active threat scenarios. "General, with respect, the human monitoring systems tracked over 10,000 variables simultaneously. They maintained databases covering every aspect of galactic civilization. Their response teams could address multiple crisis types at the same time. Building such capabilities would take centuries, assuming we even knew where to begin." Trade Minister Skin showed patterns of deep worry. "The current economic collapse will reach critical levels within weeks. We do not have centuries to build new systems." High Mathematician Land's crystal body flickered with distressed light patterns. "Our predictive models cannot even calculate the scope of the current crisis. How can we prevent future threats when we cannot understand the present situation?" The debate continued for hours. Some delegates argued for attempting to rebuild human capabilities from scratch. Others suggested dividing the responsibilities among existing species. A few proposed accepting the collapse and starting over with smaller, simpler civilizations. But as the discussions progressed, one fact became undeniable. The galaxy was dying, and only the humans had the knowledge and systems to save it. The moment of decision came when a new report arrived from the border regions. The HFY War had triggered a chain reaction. 6 more conflicts had erupted as old treaties failed and resource shortages drove desperate species to violence. "At current rates," reported military advisor, "we will have 43 active wars within 30 days. Our peacekeeping forces cannot handle even half that number. Civilian casualties are already in the millions." High Counselor looked around the chamber at the faces of leaders who had run out of options. "We have a choice. We can let our pride destroy our civilization, or we can ask for help from the only beings who know how to save us." The vote was not close. When faced with extinction, even the proudest species chose survival. Walked slowly to the quantum communicator that Ambassador had left behind. The small black device sat on a ceremonial table, its single red button seeming to glow in the chamber's lights. "Before I activate this device," said, We must accept what calling for human help really means. We are not asking for assistance between equals. We are admitting that we need guardians because we cannot survive without them. He pressed the red button. The response was immediate. The communicator's surface lit up with gentle blue light. An ambassador's voice filled the chamber with perfect clarity. Emergency protocol activated. We have been monitoring your situation and are already en route. Our ships will arrive in your space within 72 hours. The stunned silence in the chamber was broken by Minister. You have been monitoring us. How? His voice carried a note of gentle amusement. Did you really think we would leave our friends without any way to help them? We have been watching from a distance, hoping you would figure out how to handle things yourselves. Unfortunately, the situation has deteriorated faster than we expected. How many ships are you sending? Asked General Oz. All of them replied. 72 hours later, the human fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of Council territory. The alien delegates who had dismissed humans as weak and unremarkable watched in shock as massive ships appeared on their sensors. These were not the modest exploration vessels that had left Council space 6 months earlier. These were ARC ships vessels, the size of small moons that clearly had been built for one purpose, moving entire civilizations. Ambassador's flagship docked at the Council station, and he walked into the great chamber followed by a delegation of humans that dwarfed any previous diplomatic mission. Instead of 15 advisors, he brought 1,500 specialists. Ambassador, High Counselor said formally, the Galactic Council requests emergency assistance to prevent the collapse of our civilization. Nodded gravely. We accept your request. Our teams are already deploying to critical locations throughout Council space. We should have the immediate crisis under control within 2 weeks. As he spoke, reports began arriving of human ships appearing throughout the galaxy. They moved with purpose and precision, heading directly to the most critical problem areas without needing directions or guidance. You were prepared for this, realized Intelligence Director. You knew we would fail without you. His expression was sad but not surprised. We studied your species for over a century. We understood your strengths and your limitations. We hoped you might surprise us, but we prepared for the more likely outcome. What happens now? Asked High Counselor. Looked around the chamber at the assembled representatives of galactic civilization. That depends on whether you are ready to accept what humans actually are and what we do. Over the following weeks, the human rescue operation unfolded with breathtaking efficiency. Human crisis response teams ended wars by restoring the communication networks that had enabled peaceful negotiations. Human engineers fixed the economic algorithms that managed galactic trade. Human medical specialists stopped disease outbreaks before they spread beyond single worlds. But most remarkably, human ARC ships began disgorging millions of passengers. These were not all humans. Refugees from dozens of species emerged from the great vessel's beings who had quietly joined humanity during their exile. We offered sanctuary to anyone who wanted to come with us, explained to the amazed council delegates. Many species had members who understood what we were trying to accomplish. They chose to learn from us rather than remain behind. The final revelation came when human children began playing with young aliens from the rescued species in the parks outside the council chambers. The sight of different species working together in harmony was something the council had struggled to achieve for centuries, yet humans had accomplished it naturally during their brief exile. Ambassador stood once more at the center podium of the Galactic Council, but this time the chamber was quiet with respect rather than dismissive boredom. We are not returning as the same species that left 6 months ago, announced. We are returning as what we have always been, the gardeners of galactic civilization. We will monitor the threats you cannot see, prevent the crises you cannot predict, and maintain the systems you cannot understand. Not because you are inferior, but because this is what humans do. We help everything else survive and thrive. High Counselor's crystal body glowed with acceptance and gratitude. Will you rejoin the council as an equal member? Smiled, no, we will serve as the council's protectors. Your job is to reach for greatness in your own ways. Our job is to make sure you survive long enough to achieve it. From that day forward, the galaxy operated under a new understanding. The great species pursued their dreams of crystal perfection, trade mastery, and military glory. But quietly, in the background, humans watched over 10,000 potential disasters and made sure that, in a universe that tended toward chaos and death, intelligence and hope would always prevail. In the end, humanity's true power was not in conquest or dominance. It was in their stubborn, inexplicable refusal to let anyone else fail.